My dad died.
I miss my friends because of...
I don't know how to tell my friends that.
I want to help my friends. I don't know how.
The pandemic has left me feeling very lonely.
How can I best support students in my class?
My uncle abused me.
The morning meeting is meant to be a place to let you know that you are not alone. We can get through this together. So join us. Listen, learn, share your stories. This is the morning meeting. Today's guest is Eric Kussin. He is the founder of a nonprofit called We're All a Little Crazy, the Global Mental Health Alliance. He's a really interesting guy. I'm very excited to talk to him. He actually worked in the NBA and the NHL, but suffered from a debilitating mental health crisis that took probably 2.5 years of failed treatment modalities before he was able to learn some healing practices that enabled him to dig out of his abyss before launching We're All a Little Crazy in 2017. His message is really about mental health. A common topic for him is that 5 out of 5 people have mental health and therefore mental illness. So we talk about that, and we talk about how college athletes can be part of the solution to better mental health on college campuses. Eric Kussin, thank you so much for coming to the Morning Meeting podcast. We're really excited to have you today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Why don't you just tell us to start a little bit about you and what got you started in this space, and a little bit about We're All a Little Bit Crazy.
Yeah. I joked with you before that a little bit is hard for me because, my story is basically laying in a bed for 2.5 years, dysfunctional. And when your brain does that, I think when you come out of that cocoon that you've been in, you can't shut your mouth, right? It's almost the opposite effect. Like your neurons have connected in a new way now. I'll try to give you the cliff notes. I was a professional sports executive for 15 years, NBA and NHL. Was down in Florida with the Florida Panthers, chief revenue officer down there, just taken the position with a new ownership group coming in. And 6 months in my tenure there, my brain and my body hit a brick wall like I had never seen before. And what was, I guess, shared with me was to go back to New York, where the top doctors in the world are for this: Harvard, Columbia, Cornell, essentially go on a path towards healing, right? And when healing, I didn't really know at the time, was that from a brain tumor? Was it from a traumatic brain injury that I had from playing sports growing up? Was it this thing called mental health? And, it was 2015 that this happened to me. So if we think people aren't talking about it now, 6 years ago, they certainly weren't talking about it. And in sports, absolutely not talking about it. And so I went the allopathic route, which is traditional medicine. And these doctors, tops in the world, tried over 50 different psychotropic drug combinations on me. Ultimately, what was called TMS therapy, transcranial magnetic stimulation, where they shoot electromagnetic waves into your brain, hoping to wake up the neurons and getting them firing again. And then ultimately went inpatient to a psych ward, where a doctor said something to me that's part of the reason why I decided to start an organization. Eric, you've tried everything there is. Your last resort is to do shock therapy. Hearing last resort from a doctor is nothing I ever want any patient to ever hear again. And for me at the time, this was now 2017, because it's 2.5 years later, still no one was talking. So I couldn't call up a friend and be like, hey, when you were offered shock therapy, what did you do, right? So without any better judgment, I went and got 12 sessions inpatient over 5 weeks. My put under general anesthesia, my brain shocked into seizure. Same type of idea, hoping that the neurons are woken up and that my brain starts working again. And none of that worked. I end up meeting a integrative psychologist a number of weeks after leaving the hospital, who practices a different form of medicine. Every doctor I'd seen up until that point, the line of questioning always started with, Eric, what are your symptoms? Cognitive, malaise and, inability to get out of bed in the morning and can't think straight, can't put sense together. And then I would get a diagnosis: ADD, PTSD, OCD, ADHD, melancholic depression, anhedonic depression. And every doctor in this space, and I'm obviously speaking with a broad brush, this is not every single doctor, but the majority of doctors, they learn symptoms in a textbook, and then based on you telling them your symptoms, they can find something, because the brain is complicated. There's so many ways to assign labels, and once those labels were assigned to me, I was then assigned a medication. That explains why I tried 50 different ones, and I thought I was working my ass off during that time. Well, this doctor treated very differently. She just said, Eric, I want to get to know you. Tell me about yourself, right? And when you're asked that question, this was just very broad and open. And so I just started earliest memories, 7, 8 years old. And what ended up rolling out of me, because I had never told the story chronologically in this way, is I'm the middle of 3 boys, and my older brother, from the time I was 8 years old, he breaks his femur bone in a sporting accident, put in a body cast for a year, homeschooled. A month later, gets diagnosed with ALL, children's form of leukemia. So 5 years of chemo and radiation in the late 80s. You can imagine back then how scary that was, because there weren't as many effective chemo treatments, cancer treatments. But miraculously, 5 years in, goes into remission. A month later, he's in a Jeep Wrangler with his friends, open top, open back. Car loses control. He flies out of the back, lands on his head, cracks his head open, loses partial vision in his eyes, in ICU for a month healing. Does heal from that, goes to college, is feeling a pain in his knee. They do all the testing. They determine that his cancer's come back from childhood, same one that he had a number of years ago. Have to give him a stronger chemo regimen. It's doing a great job of knocking the cancerous cells out, but it's doing a number on his healthy cells, knocks out his healthy cells, unfortunately, in enough of a way that his body goes into what's called septic shock. So 105 fever, organs attacking themselves, falls into a coma. We don't know if he's going to wake from the coma, and the neurologist can't tell us if he's going to have any brain activity if he does wake, but miraculously wakes after 3 months of being in a coma. Funny part of the story, asks if the Yankees won the World Series when he wakes. His kidneys fail from the rigor of the septic shock. He has to go on dialysis. We all get tested in our family to see who's the closest donor match. My father donates a kidney to him. That's all successful. I get my job at the NBA league office, thinking blank slate, childhood over. And 3 of my close friends, 22 and 23 years old, pass away unexpectedly of heart conditions, just back to back to back in that year. What she shared with me when I shared that story was, Eric, you're living on this bedrock of trauma as a child. What else happened to you as a child that impacted your mental health that you want to tell me about? Now, I'm 35 in her office. These things happened to me between the ages of 8 and 23. Until you're explained these things, you don't realize that you've been laying in bed for 2.5 years because of the cumulative buildup of this stuff, right? And so I end up, I heal. We'll spend a lot of time talking about it through breathing practices, yoga, meditation, and trying all these different types of modalities. End up sharing my story on all places of LinkedIn, because I wasn't a social media person. And it takes 35 minutes to read my story in a lot greater detail than I just share with you here. And meanwhile, it gets read 150,000 times in 3 days. And I had over 400 calls come in from as far as China. What I realized on taking those calls and tracking the responses in an Excel spreadsheet was no one was sharing a disorder label with me. No one was saying, Eric, I have PTSD, or I as well, or I have bipolar, different than PTSD in this way. Instead, everyone was sharing challenging life events they'd been through. So losing a child to SIDS, a terrible divorce that they still haven't gotten over. And that realization to me made me understand that the common thread that ties the human experience together is not disorder. It's not labels. It's not this thing called mental illness. It's this thing called challenging life events, right? And we all have them at different points in our lives. And if they're cumulative and we don't know what to do about them, the same way that we know when we put weight on, we're supposed to go to the gym and run or eat better, and we lose that weight, or we start to remove that plaque from our arteries. No one tells us how to do that with our mental health. I went to the largest nonprofit websites in our country, and then I'll land the plane on this part of it. I just started noticing these organizations that I think are well-intentioned, if I take out the bias of how pharma might be involved in these messages, but in trying to explain to us what mental health is, there's 3 main story threads on all of these websites that are consistent that I noticed in 2017. And that, by the way, in 2021, the messages are still exactly the same. And those 3 were, the first was 1 in 5 people being mentally ill. What that does is they're trying to show that that's a lot of people. That's 20% of people you should consider your mental health. But what it is it's a green light to 80% of the population, 4 in 5 people, to say, I'm not in that mentally ill category. This topic's not for me, right? So immediately we're disregarding people and people aren't paying attention. Second thing is all the campaigns were mirror images of each other. They were an action word followed by stigma. So stop the stigma, stomp the stigma, break the stigma, erase the stigma. The term stigma means there's a group of people, human beings, forming opinions and judgments about other groups of people. That's not a rallying cry to bring people together. That's a rallying cry to shoot across the bow at other people and say, you're the problem. You need to stop doing what you're doing. We're the ones who are being impacted. We're the victims. You need to be nicer to us. That's not how you bring people together, right? Like there's enough social change topics we want to get to in society that shows that when you tell people they're doing things the wrong way, they don't listen. When you start to talk about your commonalities, that's what makes them listen. And then the third thing was the way in which celebrities started sharing stories. Is these websites were linking because they were excited that Britney Spears, she's part of our 1 in 5 group. She's got depression. Lindsay Lohan, she's part of our 1 in 5 group. She's got anxiety. And then they link to an Us Weekly or People magazine article and it'd be like, yeah, Britney Spears has depression and she shaves her head. Lindsay Lohan has anxiety and she dresses like a hot mess. You look at those three now that I just described, 1 in 5 people, let's stop stigmatizing them. And the them looks like people who shave their heads, run off basketball courts and panic attacks. And in the case of Kanye West, say crazy things about their family and think they have a chance of winning the presidency. No wonder why most people are not, lining up at an auditorium and going, hey, let me voluntarily come to this thing called a mental health event and hear more about what you have to talk. Our campaign, you called it out, like we're all a little crazy in quotes. And then within that, our main message that we, kind of like how Nike has just do it, our message is same here, which is an American Sign Language sign, which everyone in the world can say it to each other, as in, Mandy, you and I were the same. And I don't have to know anything about you other than that you're a human being. And I know we're the same because as human beings, we both have faced challenges. I could say that 1-to-1, or I can say that 1-to-3,000 if I'm speaking to a big group. That breaks down this topic of stigma and this concept of stigma way quicker than anything that relates to action word followed by stigma ever will, because it's talking about the commonalities of what we all face. Mm-hmm. So I'll stop there because I know you just wanted just like the story piece of it, but that's at least the 3 years of my life of craziness that then led to kind of the work that I've been doing now.
That's incredible. Incredible in that it hasn't been that long since this happened, and you've really created such an incredible movement. This podcast is brought to you by Inner Harbor, providing support and education to grieving students everywhere. Inner Harbor provides workshops and trainings for staff and students, teaching you how to support other grievers. So if you are interested in learning more about how we can educate your class, your fraternity, your sorority, your team, your club, or your agency, go to www.inner-harbor.org to learn more. You can also subscribe to our weekly newsletter and check out all of the other services we offer. If you're enjoying the podcast, you can also sponsor an episode by checking out the sponsorship page on the website. And if you're feeling extra generous, you can go to Apple or Audible podcasts and leave a review. Now back to the show. I've also been, I follow you and I try to stay abreast of what you are doing. I've noticed that you spend a lot of your energy, and I guess maybe this comes because you worked in the field of college athletes. Why college athletes? What is it about them that either you felt like they needed the support or you felt like they were
No, it's a good question. Look, I mean, my background is in sports, right? I was a college athlete myself, so there's probably a commonality there. The concept of same here is about 5 and 5 instead of 1 and 5, right? So I'm being a little bit misleading if I'm focusing so much on college athletes specifically, right? And programmatically, I mean, what we put on social media is oftentimes the people who have the larger platforms, who are people who usually play high level college sports or, now playing pros and did play college sports before. A lot of our programming is in, K through 12, is with first responders, is in offices, is in sports teams and leagues on the executive side of things. So we try not to make that the main focus, but I think what you may have noticed, which hopefully helps understand why that area is so helpful in painting this bigger picture for everyone else, is college athletes go through transition periods more at an earlier age and more frequently than most. Okay, so what do I mean by that, right? They oftentimes they're trying out for the Olympics, high level, right? Or they're trying to make a professional league, right? So most of us, right? Let's take college athletes out of it for a second. We're only beginning our career and then are going to work for 45 years in accounting, finance, as a doctor, as a teacher, whatever we're doing. And we have from the time we're 22 until we're 65 to think about transition. As an athlete, you don't have that luxury because you're either going to make the Olympic team or you're not. And you've been training your entire life for it. You're either going to make the professional team or you're not. And you've been training your entire life for it. If you don't make the professional team here in the States, you're going to try and make one overseas, or you're not, or maybe you are going to make it, but you have to make the decision of, do I really want to live in another country when this is the only country I've known for so long, right? Then you're dealing with disappointment more frequently than most, right? Because what's in front of you is a game. Well, how often in everyday life, like, is exactly what you do measured and you given a scorecard on it, right? So like as a college athlete, it's like, this is how many goals you scored. This is how many assists you had. This is how much time you had on the field, on the court, on the ice, right? These transition periods, which is a big part of what trauma is a microcosm of the bigger picture of what people deal with in life, right? And, a lot of what you deal with, loss. I'll give you kind of like another analogy to loss is when the pandemic happened, a lot of these college athletes, even high school athletes, they didn't understand why they were feeling what they felt when their sport got taken away from them. That's a traumatic loss. Even though the sport might come back a year later, even though they might get that year of eligibility back, what happens is when you pictured something was going to be one way, having a certain person in your life, and then that gets taken away from you and that person is now no longer in your life, what the loss is from what you were envisioning. Oh, that person's going to walk me down the aisle. That person's going to be there for my grandkid, whatever it is. Now that gets taken away because something happens. Well, when you're an athlete and your mind is thinking, when I do this on the court, field, or the ice next season, right? And then all of a sudden that's taken away. Or in the cases, severe cases, well, I say severe, more, I guess, long-lasting cases where a person lost the year of eligibility and or needed to go right to work. They go from, I had 3 years of playing to now I'm never going to play the sport ever again after thinking I was going to get that senior year. That's a big loss that they have to deal with, right? So hopefully that helps explain why the focus on athletes is often there, is because I think their stories help tell a picture that or paint a picture for so many people that they can relate to and say, it's not exactly what you went through, but it's enough and it happened to an earlier time in your life that I can relate.
I always say, like, you explained it perfectly. Like, those are losses. And when we experience loss, we have feelings. And those feelings are called grief. We all have, every one of us has experienced grief over the past, year and a half due to the pandemic, but most of us have experienced it plenty of other times as well. I have a son who's an athlete in college as well. Many times you think of like sports as a protective factor for mental health, right? Like, it's a good thing to exercise and the team and all of the support that you get from being on a team. But then there's also this incredible amount of pressure. I wonder, and maybe about, like, how do we support college athletes and their mental health on a campus? What are some ways?
So, let's take Division I as an example. There's still, of all the Division I campuses around the country, there's only 50 schools that have a sports psychologist that works in the athletic department, right? So that's an issue. Now, the schools that have it, it's great. And you take a school like University of Southern California, they have 6 sports psychologists. Most Division I organizations only have 1 sports psychologist. But let's take those out of the equation for a second. Mm-hmm. And you talked about, like, we think of sports as this positive thing. Okay, but think about all the interpersonal interactions that happen between athlete and coach, player and peer, other player on the team, right? Like, why is coach not giving me a lot of playing time? Why don't they understand that I also have to study when even though that I have to do film session, right? So there's stuff that we have to balance as a student athlete that oftentimes the traditional student doesn't have to balance as much, right? Like, where it's more about balancing social life, which is more kind of on your own time to be able to do that. When you're a college athlete, it's almost like a job on campus in addition to what you have to do, as a student. And
And not a great
so,
job at this point too, which is also an additional stressor for some people.
yes, absolutely. And so on the campuses where there's not those 50 that understand sports specifically, you're going to the campus counseling center, right? So, and this is the interaction that we see happen all the time. I'm not calling anything out. I'm not calling out any one specific campus. This is just reality. Student athlete has a run-in with the coach and is dealing with their own stuff at home. Parents are getting divorced, right? Having a breakup with their boyfriend or girlfriend. They go to the college counseling center that's not sports specific.
Mhm.
Well, the counselor says, well, what is the coach saying to you? Give me more of the background. Oh, he told me that, I came here on scholarship and, here's my responsibilities and here's what I need to do to work hard. That coach can't say that to you. You have to manage yourself. Oh, okay. So the player takes that and goes back to the coach and either says that to the assistant coach or their captain and then the coach comes back and says, who's telling you that? You're a scholarship athlete. You got these responsibilities, right? It's an education process of bringing together the counseling centers, and we do them and we call them same here sit downs. And we bring the entire, athlete population together where we have the coaches there, the athletic directors there, the athletes themselves. And then we bring the mental health professionals from campus onto stage, so to speak, with us. And the reason we do that is because we want to position them as personal trainers for their brain, the way that they have personal trainers in the gym.
Mhm.
Because without that, and I see this throughout all sports, athletes think of mental health professionals as the doctor that's going to psychoanalyze me, as opposed to the person who's just there to get my brain in better shape, right?
Like the trainer.
And, we call gym for the brain, right? And it once you realize that and you're like, wait a second, okay, when I sit in the room and I get stim on my knee and ice on my knee, why is it any different to go into that door and work on this? There's no shame in doing it. But I think society, this matrix that we live in, that's positioned like weakness, weakness, weakness. When we go and talk to someone, there's this fear of, are people going to judge me when I go and I do something? And when I go and talk to someone. And so that's, it's an education process. That's really all it is, because what we know about therapy is when done the right way, it's nothing different than just proactively working on yourself and giving yourself more space in these things that we have that are part of the way we can optimally function.
And I feel like I hear so often that, sports it's just as mental as it is physical, right? If we're not working on our mental health, we're like missing half of
But here's the problem, right? Like, and it's the verbiage that's used. And I'll even throw a company like Calm, which is such a big company, under the bus a little bit in this. Calm's largest endorser right now is LeBron James, right? Well, if you want endorsers, how many bigger endorsers are there than LeBron James? Like maybe Lady Gaga, I don't know. But what that did in having LeBron be the champion for what they do is now the concentration became mental performance, right? So you start to think about things like, oh, we're going to use one of those drills where the green and the red dots start blinking. We have to touch each one with our hands because our hand-eye coordination gets better and we're able to see our field of vision. Or we're going to do visualization about thinking about hitting that free throw. These things are all important, but so too is the bag of stuff that we carry from our past, because that impacts neurobiological changes in our body, which also impacts performance. So when we only think about the productive, proactive stuff moving forward, and we're not dealing with the stuff of what we're holding on to from the past, we're not really dealing with helping the whole person, and productivity suffers, right? And so a lot of what we do when we go on college campuses is explaining that, working on the mental health of an individual is not just mental performance, even though that sounds cooler and easier to sell for people. Call it whatever you want at the beginning. What you have to dive into is peeling away the layers also, not in like a psychoanalyzation type of way, but meditations, yogas, breathing practices to create greater space, because so much of that space has been taken up by the stuff that we've built up over time in our childhood.
Mm-hmm. When I said like it's a mental game, not just a physical game, but yes, you absolutely have to make sure you're taking good care of your mental health, not your mental performance. Really. Really interesting. I also thought you said something that was cool, that when you bring the counselors up on the stage with you, it really made me think about, and I know, coaches are not going to be psychologists. They don't need necessarily to be a therapist, but they need training too. It's not just about like, where to go for college athletes to get support, but the coaches and the counselors really need to be working together to make sure that they're not sending different messages. And that's feels kind of huge.
Yeah, it's and look, the generation that we're in right now, which is, the folks who are coaches grew up in the suck it up mentality, right? And a lot of them, especially when you go to some of these campuses where they've already won national championships, the attitude is, what do I need to change for? Doesn't matter that the new wave of students is coming in. I have a way of doing things and I know this works, right? And so it's meshing. I've got a system and I know it's successful with, you want it to be more successful. You want to look out for your athletes so it's this balance when you talk to the coaches of explaining it to them through the lens, not just of health, but of impact on performance as well, right? Look, I had many coaches that I love. Don't get me wrong. I'm not throwing those coaches under the bus in high school and even in college, where it was like the best athletes are the ones that, step their toe on every single line when they're doing the runs and never miss a line as they go back and forth and are in it every weight session. And that's part of being an athlete. Yes, is showing up and being an example and being a leader, but also part of being an athlete and being a leader is understanding balance and understanding what's going to make us the healthiest we can be. And so there's no question that it's a challenge when you're dealing with folks who've had, especially the ones who've had success, because their thought is, what do I need to change for? And I'll say this, like, you look at like the Mike Krzyzewskis of the world, the coach of Duke basketball, and even Greg Popovich in the NBA, with the Spurs. They've had a lot of success for 20, 30-year span. And most recently, not trying to throw anyone under the bus who's a Duke fan or a Spurs fan, not as much success, right? And even like Greg Popovich is struggling a little bit right now with the USA team, and they're not just dominating and winning, right? And look, I'm not in the room. I did work with Popovich when I was with the NBA, so I saw a little of his tactics, but it hasn't been recent. Is this old school mentality of how things are run and we do things this way and this is the Duke way, right? Whatever it is, that's got to change a lot as society changes and as young athletes start to see the world differently than what we did growing up. As leaders, we have to take notice of that and say, there's something to this. If anyone wants to watch something that was really, really impactful to me, it was Giannis, the guy who won from the Milwaukee Bucks, 6'11" guy from Greece. And it was beautiful the way that he said it, because English is his second language. And after he won the title last week, he said, usually in this space of mental health, we say, oh, anxiety is focusing on fear of the future and depression is holding on to the past. He didn't say that at all. I'm going to botch what he said, but it was something to the effect of like, when we talk about what we've done previously, that's ego. Oh, I accomplished this, I accomplished that. And when we talk about what we're going to do to someone moving forward in a game upcoming, that's pride. Oh, I'm going to score 30 points in that person. He said, to be the best you can be, you got to drop ego and you got to drop pride and you got to play in that moment as if you've never played against that person or that team before, and give it your all in that moment, regardless of how much you've accomplished. And that was awesome to hear, right? It was like a new take on mental performance, mental health, kind of whatever you want to call the combination of those two things. But, I think there's a new wave of athlete who's having a different understanding and wants to have the mental game be part of the overall success that they're having.
Right. And I do think, I want to pay attention to all college students. They all need support and everybody's got something, right? And we're all 5 out of 5. But the athletes, they are sort of in this position of prominence and people look up to them, and they could, and I'm sure some do, have this amazing opportunity that they can take advantage of to show vulnerability, to show that, things affect them. And I think sometimes that's the message that they don't hear. They hear this message of you have to look strong. And
well, there's two issues of the messages they hear. One is you have to look strong, right? That's been a consistent message that they've heard for a long time. And then fear of things like, because they're in a competitive space, someone might take my position if they're able to rile me up because they know I'm dealing with this and that I'm going to lose playing time, right? So that's one. The other issue I believe in this space, and obviously this is a controversial take, but I don't mind saying it, is The professional athletes in the majority with the largest platforms who have spoken up, and we're all applauding them. We're like, great, more people are talking now. This is awesome. Question is, how are they talking? And most of what I hear from the largest people with the largest platforms is, my name is this, I have this disorder, and so I use this to get better. It's an endorsement deal. All that does is further perpetuate the idea that that athlete lives in the 1 in 5. You said the magic word, which is vulnerability. We get a lot more from an athlete saying, growing up, my relationship with my mom wasn't that great, and that hurts me right now that we're not that close. That might not, be what the advertiser wants when you're trying to sell, a pill, or whatever it is that they're going to them for. But that's what's relatable to people, and that's what opens up this topic of what mental health is to more people. So, where athletes, I think, are struggling right now is even the people who are ahead of the curve, quote unquote, in being more open. Question is, how are they being open when it's just labels and erratic behaviors? I don't think that helps us.
And also, I agree. I think there's a lot of interviews with the athletes and things that, well, how did you get through it? Well, this is how I got through it. But we're not talking to them while they're trying to figure it all out. Like right now, it's just, I'm in the muck. It sucks now.
And usually their answer, even if they, if they have some kind of detailed answer on it, it's, I use Talkspace and I was able to talk to people. So they're either in the endorsement of it, or they say things that are very athlete cliche-esque of like, I needed to have a lot of faith and really buckle down and work hard on being in the moment. I mean, someone who's struggling and is on their bed, that's not helpful, right? Like, you need X's and O's of, here were the modalities that I did. Here's why they work for me. Here's what I got out of them. Here's the progress of how I saw it happen over time. That's a type of vulnerability and detail that we need. And again, that's not getting shared.
So what do you think about like currently, like athletes that are, that they are coming out and talking about the mental health, and like athletes that don't want to do interviews with the press and stepping away from some sports at this point because they're, they are saying like, I'm not doing well and I need to step away.
Yeah, like you take the example that you're giving is Naomi Osaka, who couldn't do press during Roland Garros, which is the French Open. The media still doesn't understand this topic. So the problem is the people who are reporting on what's happening are getting it all wrong. So it's great that Naomi Osaka is raising the volume on what needs to be discussed, which if I'm a reporter and I'm responsible in this space, I'm going to do some research. I'm going to say, oh, this is interesting. A player who can play in front of 20,000 people and millions on TV, and that doesn't raise their level of anxiety, but when it's in front of 3 reporters who are asking them questions, that does cause anxiety. Oh, that's kind of similar to the person who can go to school, can function in school, but then when they're put in a room to talk with friends, just one-on-one or one-on-3, they get a little this thing called social anxiety, and that's different. Oh, wow, I can see how those things transfer across. That should be the narrative. And instead, the narrative are things like, oh, what could be so, like, if they're able to play this way, why, that's what their responsibility is. They should be able to play that way. Or you take the Richard Sherman situation, which was the NFL cornerback recently, whose wife was on a 911 call as he was charging at his father-in-law's house. And people see that behavior. And my immediate reaction when I saw that behavior was, how many neighbors over the course of my life have I seen yell at each other in that same exact way? Like, that's life. That's what interpersonal relationships are. And yet you look at the media and they see those clips and they're like, look, a result of traumatic brain injury and CTE. Look, that's the manic phase of bipolar, right? They have no idea what he's going through, no idea what the background of the family interpersonal relationships are. That's what mental health is. And they're just putting a mental illness diagnosis and label on it. And what that does is it confuses it for everyone else, because again, back to the erratic behaviors. Well, I don't want to be seen as that. So we're not going to talk about my mental health, because if anyone sees me charging at a door, I'm not employable anymore. I can't get the next job I want, all those things down the road. So it's great that more athletes are speaking up, but we have to get the media to catch up and understanding the right way to talk about these things, or we're just perpetuating the same misnomers over and over again.
I sort of I've been watching all of this happening, right? All of these athletes sort of, Naomi and others, And I've been struggling with, like, is this a good thing or not? And I think there's a little bit of both. So,
Well, look, you take sports and take mental health out of it. I hope I'm not saying anything too controversial here. I think our media is in the business of splitting us up and putting us into different categories, because when we're in different categories, we get emotional. When we get emotional, we want to consume more. We want to watch more. We want to buy more, right? So it behooves them to continue to not get this right and tell the same narrative over and over again. And then look at the freak show that we're watching, who's charging at the door of his in-law. They like that, and look, I'm not in the room with, the TV executives to say that, but you see the consistency enough across sports, politics, social issues. The thread is there, right? And so that's why advocacy work is so important. That's why, we have these things called social media, albeit, they suppress the hell out of us because they don't want the messages out there. But we got to hold hands as advocates and keep, through podcasts like this, through social posts, setting the record straight of what mental health is, so that people better understand it. And every person you teach, that they have the ability to then teach 2 more people and then 4 more people, and it's exponential from there. So I think the roles that we all play in terms of, almost countering what we're seeing in the media is so important.
I agree. I do. I describe mental health sort of typically like a spectrum. Like, we all have health to some degree, right? So your health may be better than mine in general. Maybe today mine's better than yours. Tomorrow I get a cold. I'm not as healthy as I was yesterday. The next day I recover from that cold. I'm doing better. I can have underlying illnesses, who knows, whatever. And our mental health is sort of the same way, right? So it's just up and down, and we can have good days and bad days and things that pop up for us. And all of us have that. So we all have mental health and we all have mental illness. It's just what it is.
It's an interesting analogy to use with that is, when I've used the continuum example for people, because that's what, the basis, the foundation of what Same Here is about, people will say, well, but Eric, no. Someone either has cancer or they don't have cancer, just like they have bipolar or they don't have bipolar. And I said, well, actually, everyone's got cancerous cells in their body. Like, I don't mean, obviously, as someone whose brother suffered twice with cancer, I don't mean that in a joking way. What I mean by I'm laughing because of the irony of it, of what cancer is it's the buildup of those cancer cells because our immune system hasn't been able to find them, get rid of them, right? And then they accumulate over time. So this continuum idea, you could talk about that with cancer. You could talk about that if you and I are 2 and 3 years old, we're walking down the street and we turn our ankle, that ligament is never going to be the same again. And then throughout the course of our life, every time we're playing a sport or we're walking down the street and we trip again, and that ankle turns again, guess what? With the susceptibility towards it being more stretched out is still there. That's what health is. Health is an ongoing fight against, the factors in life that impact us. Absolutely. And that's the only way we'll ever come together on this, is realizing that it's all of us facing those factors
together. Absolutely.
Yep.
So how do people find you if they're interested in having you come to their campus, talk to them, learn more from you? How should they get connected with you?
Thanks for asking. So it's the website, just to find more information generally, is samehereglobal.org. So SAMEHERE and then global.org. My email address is easy. It's Eric with a C at samehereglobal.org. And then all of our social media channels are what I have up on the screen here, which is at samehere_global. So that's the only difference with the social channels, is there's an underscore before global. But yeah, well, and I, as with DMs and stuff like that, I like interacting with people. I don't mind when people write at 2 a.m. and they're going through something. And I'm not a therapist. I have to say that, always as the disclaimer, but I'm a peer-to-peer, helper. I don't even like the term coach. I'm a peer-to-peer helper, not in like a monetary way, and like a reach out if I can help you in any way and point you in the right direction. Just because when you've been through as much shit as I went through, I don't mean that as a badge of honor. I mean that as I just look back and like, I've tried every friggin' treatment there is. Like I can help people navigate with what they're going through, what I think might help them, again, from a peer-to-peer standpoint. So
you certainly provide that validation and normalization that we've all been through it.
Yeah.
So Thank you. I do hope people reach out to you. You've been such a great friend and colleague for me, and I encourage people to reach out to you too.
Thank you so much. And we'll thank Mike for putting us together.
Yes, right. Yeah, thank you to Mike Hammer. Thank you so much to Eric for being on the podcast today. Next week, I talked to Annie Tolkien. She's the founder and director of Accessible College. She is an expert in the area of college prep and transitions for students with physical disabilities and health conditions. She supports students and families across the country. We're going to talk about what it's like to be a student with a disability on a college campus and how to make sure you're getting the supports that you need. I hope you will join us then. That's all for today. Good morning to all of you.